I'm excited to talk today about the process of turning a PhD dissertation into a book. It's something that I recently did myself. I'll link the book and also my original research in the description below. But I wanted to use my experience just as a little bit of a sharing resource opportunity for those who are considering or wanting to transition their research into book form, which can be really daunting for people who have completed a dissertation, not only because of the mental exhaustion that goes into completing a dissertation and then thinking that one has to then rework it into a different form can be overwhelming. Also, just entering the publishing world beyond academic research can be really daunting as well, and making decisions that are really aligned with your values, your approach to your research, the audience that you want to reach. So I'll be talking about a couple of things today, focusing on voice, publisher and platform, audience, length and structure, methodology, and then action or future orientation of the work. So beginning with voice, I think the most important thing with transitioning from a dissertation to a book is the shift in voice. Within a dissertation, in many ways, the voice of the dissertation are the other scholars within the field that you're looking at, and then the research findings themselves, as opposed to you as the researcher having the primary voice. And that's intentional. You're lifting up histories of research that led to your research question. You're also lifting up the findings or the research participants in your research through the dissertation. But when you move into book form, you as the author really become the primary voice. And the way that you amplify that voice is really important, but can be really sort of disjointed coming out of that voice that you have in the dissertation. And it takes some time to get used to that, especially if you are not necessarily gated toward having your own writing voice, particularly coming out of academia. So I think it's a helpful thing to have a bit of a pause after you complete the dissertation work to let that settle and that journey sort of work itself out, and then begin freshly where you're focusing on your own voice, and really feeling confident that you've already sort of proven your chops within whatever field you are working in, that you no longer have to prove your relevance within a field. That's already been done through the dissertation, so have confidence in that. The next thing to talk about relates to voice is the publisher that's going to amplify this work. And this was something that I had a bit of a couple of stage process with. I began looking with a larger publisher when I was within the actual dissertation research and found that it was not aligned with my values, particularly as a feminist researcher. And I found that I needed to step away from having sort of that larger conglomerate of a publisher be the thing that gave myself legitimacy, and instead stand on my own in the sense that my research kind of would speak for itself, and that I needed to instead go with a publisher that was more aligned with my values as a researcher, particularly a feminist researcher. So I went with a kind of smaller, focused, you could call it boutique or independent publisher. I'll link that below. It's called Tehom Center Publishing, which focuses on feminist and queer authors, writers, with a commitment to elevating BIPOC writers. And as I worked within that community and the editors in that community, I just felt that this was a really important place for me to use as a platform and publishing home for my work. Similarly related to the publishing choice is really fine-tuning your audience. When you're writing in an academic space, especially in a sort of PhD dissertation world, you don't necessarily have a specific audience in mind, because you're really just placing it within a context of research that's already been done, showing a unique element of your research. In many ways, the audience, in the case for me, were the research participants themselves. They were the real audience of the research. But when you get into the book form and you're wanting to sort of spread out this work into the broader community, the broader world, being really clear on who your audience is will also help you determine what publisher to go with, because you're not going to be trying to have this be a book for everybody. In fact, it won't be, particularly if, like myself, you're a feminist researcher, your work is not necessarily going to resonate with everybody, and you want to be clear about who your audience is and state that very clearly in the actual writing itself. So moving into the actual writing structure length of the book form, it should be a more user-friendly resource, especially if it's going to be in sort of general audience, not necessarily in an academic space. I definitely would cut significant parts of the dissertation because it just doesn't land as well for a general audience or book form. So for those who are doing social science research, it's really wise to cut back the lit review and the methodology chapters. Also, they're already well established in your dissertation, and you can refer back to your dissertation within the book itself, so don't feel like you have to repeat that. So the lit review, be selective on what's important to create a foundation for the rest of the book, but definitely you don't need to just dump the entire lit review in there. Likewise with the methodology, I think as a feminist researcher, I really wanted to show that the methodology was very mindful and it was a very particularly feminist constructivist methodology that was liberative, that was centering the voices of marginalized people and marginalized experiences. So I was upfront about elements of my methodology and my study design, but I did not by any means include the full, very, very long chapter that it was in my actual dissertation. In terms of length, I really wanted a book that was around 200 to 230 pages, definitely under 250. I really wanted to center around a 60,000 word count, and I needed to go back for multiple revisions to bring it down to that level. I wouldn't want anything more than that. I would have liked to have it be a little bit less, maybe just under 200 pages, again, to make it more accessible and reader-friendly and more of a practical resource for people. But I ended up having at the higher end of about 230 pages, mostly because I wanted to make sure I kept the research findings fully intact and not editing those down, really for the particular audience that I had in mind. And then I think the last piece is that it is action-oriented. I think with books versus a dissertation unfortunately can get hidden within sort of the world of academia. It's not necessarily a citation that people use as much in related research, but if you have it in a book form, it's going to be much more accessible to people. And so part of that book itself can and should, in particular, if you are in a kind of a feminist research, action-based research mindset, you want the book to really be able to be used in concrete ways. So I ended up adding a couple sections actually to the book form that were practical applications of the research. In fact, that itself could have been another book. But I think when we are wanting to use the book in a way that is liberative, that is changing lives, changing institutions, we want to really lift up the ways in which this can be used in a practical way, which sometimes in a dissertation context, it's not as always clear because the research itself is what's being focused on. So I hope that's helpful. Feel free to look in the description box below where I'll link my research and the book that came out of that, and also the publisher that I'm working with, which is Tehom Center Publishing. And I wish you the best in your revisions as you transition your dissertation into book form.